right, good morning. It's Tuesday morning. Sorry I couldn't be here yesterday. I had a funeral that I had to go and work at. And last week, Sam Ramsey, former mayor of Covington, passed away. And yesterday, I went and shot the memorial video yesterday. Well, I tell you what, he was a veteran, and a statesman, and generally a pretty busy boy his whole life. Every time I see a young soldier hand that flag off to a widow, it just tears me up. It's something I've done myself several occasions, and it's hard to do. It's hard to. Yeah, it's tough. So, good morning. I hope this finds you well. And yeah, we're going to talk about that CDC article. We're going to talk about that article from Breitbart. Y'all seen the article about the CDC numbers? Yeah. Let's take a look. So, here we have Breitbart. CDC coronavirus fatality rate 0.26%. 8 to 15 times lower than estimates. That's data from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention suggests that the novel coronavirus's true fatality rate in the United States, which takes into account mild and asymptomatic cases, stands at 0.26%. Now remember, when this lockdown thing started, they were saying that the rate would be. Most of the outlets were saying 4%. Some were saying as high as 7%. And please believe, 4 to 7%, that's outrageous. That's a huge, terrifying death rate. And hey, I'm still not going to say that COVID isn't deadly. But I'm pretty sure I'm ready to say that it's not as bad as the flu. Because, like I said, this article from Breitbart, true infection and mortality rate is more than double the flu's 0.1%. The case or crude fatality rate only takes into account confirmed coronavirus cases, excluding people with mild or no symptoms that do not require medical attention. Meanwhile, the infection fatality rate accounts for the estimated number of mild and asymptomatic cases. It tends to be lower than the crude fatality ratio because it shows that more people have contracted the virus without dying. So, before I hit you with the gotcha on this particular article, and hopefully some of you are already noticing that there's something wrong with the article I'm looking at right now. Something a little suspicious. Maybe. The thing that's suspicious here is not the numbers that are being reported in this article, by the way. We'll get to that in just a second. You're looking at... When you're looking at the fatality rates and the death numbers, you're not looking at a straight count of deaths. Right? When the flu is calculated, for example, here's how the CDC estimates the burden of seasonal influenza in the United States. Here's the chart. They start with the reported rate of hospitalization. The number of people who have actually gone to the hospital with the flu. Right? Correct for under-detection. Okay, so you start with the number you have, and then you assume that number is larger. And just so we're clear, we're talking about a country where less than half the people go and get the flu vaccine. And a wide majority of people, well, a wide majority. There are plenty of people like me who, I'll spike a fever, I'll end up with what is probably the flu on occasion, every couple of years or so maybe. And I'll just take a hot shower and take a day off and I'm good. Right? And there are others who, they might take several days off of work or whatever. They're homesick. right? And uh, that, but that's literally part of the math, is that the CDC is assuming that there are people who simply don't report. And I'm not saying that's an invalid assumption. Like I said, I'm a case example. But they're operating under the assumption that it's wildly underreported. Then they get the adjusted rate of hospitalization and extrapolate to U.S. population. Right? So there's a lot going on here that is technically math, but really it's just advanced guesswork. And that's not even to say that those numbers are never accurate. Right? They're reasonably in the ballpark. They're not bad numbers, but they're not exact and true numbers. Now, that's with the flu. And there is a piece of information that I really, really, really want to put my finger on for the purposes of this video, and I can't find it anywhere. And that is, so I'm going to have to operate under this assumption based on some other information that we'll get to in a minute. We have to operate under the assumption that the COVID cases are similarly guessed at. The COVID death counts are similarly guessed at. We've got 250,000 deaths in the U.S. We don't. It's not that high yet. The claimed number is close to that, but we're not there yet. If somebody can show me where that's just a straight count of these people died in the hospital with COVID, that would actually be helpful, because it would shed some light on how these numbers are being decided, or how these numbers are being calculated. But I don't think that's what's happening there. It seems like basically just like this, it's an extrapolation against the population based on the assumption of underreporting and the like. We do have 6 million confirmed cases. That is a raw number. That's 6 million people have tested positive for COVID, and even that I'm a little leery of, because, okay, if you tell me that we've just straight up tested, well, on the numbers, it would be like, 100 million people or so. That seems a little steep. That'd be a third of the population almost. And 6 million of them have COVID. 6 million of them were positive. Like, that's an actual, just straight count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not an assumptive tabulation. That's one thing. But this article that we're looking at from Breitbart here, here's the thing that's really interesting about it. This article is from May. Okay, let me bring that up where you can see it good. May. Okay? Back in May, we had already nailed down that the fatality rate was 0.26%. This is something that was already part of the conversation, because this is important. A fatality rate of 0.26%, yes, it's terrible when people die. But it's also terrible when people die because they can't pay the bills, because they lost their job, because somebody dramatically overinflated the numbers. Now let's get to the article that y'all probably clicked on the video for. This article from Breitbart, about 90% of coronavirus hospitalized patients have underlying conditions. And before we get too deep into this article, let me also add, and by the way, of those 90% of coronavirus hospitalized patients with underlying conditions. On average, they have 2.6 underlying conditions. That means that most of the people who died of coronavirus had 2, 3, 4, or 5. They had 2 or more significant comorbidities, which is to say that before they got the COVID, they had diabetes or obesity or some sort of respiratory disease like COPD. And let's be fair, being over the age of 65 is a mitigating comorbidity. The average age of a coronavirus death is higher than normal life expectancy. Everything that I can say about these articles with respect to the overinflation of the numbers, the over-reporting from the media, the pure panic porn peddling of the cartel news outlets, you could see anywhere. Tim Pool's got a good video about it. Steven Crowder's got a good video about it. Go check those out. They'll get into these numbers a little more. But there's something I want to talk to you about this morning on this front. Okay, let me... Still setting the table. We're going to blame socialism. Spoiler alert. So PolitiFact. Fact check. The CDC, they're fact checking that because it's been posted on Facebook, there's a massive censorship campaign. And let's be clear, people who are posting the article by the CDC are not the people who are being censored. Twitter and Facebook are attempting to censor the CDC because it's putting out information that is counter to the narrative. Because the narrative is, oh God, we're all going to die. And the CDC, who we're supposed to trust unquestionably, right up until now, when suddenly they're reversing the narrative. And I'm not even getting mad at the CDC on this one, because the CDC has reported, okay, this is the information we have now. And now they're reporting, okay, this is more information. I'm also not saying they're totally blameless in this, because they lied. Okay, the WHO, the CDC, Dr. Fauci. This isn't, I don't agree with the opinion. They said don't wear masks because the masks will cause harm to you. The masks will cause you to touch your face and increase your probability of infection. They were saying that as late as the end of March. And some were still saying it mid-April. And now all of a sudden, it's in vogue for mayors to usurp the Constitution, assume affirmative active powers, and order you at gunpoint to wear a mask. So we went from don't do it, it'll kill you, to do it or I'll kill you. And make no mistake, anytime a mandate is issued by government, the statement is don't do this. And this is in any case up until the mask situation in the United States. Okay, car insurance. I'll debunk the shit out of you if you bring up that exclusion. Every time a mandate is issued by government, it's comply with this order or die. If the statement doesn't end in or die, then what you're talking about is a suggestion that is not given the force of law, because there's not a chain of events that ends in you fighting a cop and getting shot. So, you'll find, like I was saying a minute ago, you'll find there's several videos where they go through the numbers And Tim Pool digs into this PolitiFact fact check. It's all opinion crap. Basically, somebody tweeted that the CDC quietly issued this article. Okay, you know what? That's a reasonable editorialization on the issue. That's a reasonable opinion to have about the way it was released, because quite frankly, they published it on their website. There was no press conference ordered. It hasn't been widely reported in the mainstream media. And not only all of that being true, it is also actively true that at least Twitter and apparently also Facebook. And yes, by the way, if Facebook adds a fact check from a website like PolitiFact, that is censorship. It's soft censorship. But what it is it's the amount of censorship they think they can get away with without losing their Section 230 exemption. Twitter has completely ceded their Section 230 exemption. If any judge finds for Twitter in a case where Twitter is sued for their liability in the publication of libel or slander, that judge should be disbarred because he's not a competent jurist. Now, all that said, here's what I want to get into. And I'm just going to put the articles away. We're done with that for now. In fact, we're done with that for the day. No, we're not. I have one article that I want to pull up in relation to this. The panic porn. The COVIDite panic. The pandemic madness. The shutdown of our country. The irreparable damage that has been done to thousands of lives, millions of lives, because we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of businesses which had many of which had multiple employees. Not all of which, probably not even most of which. Like me, for example, my business, I don't have employees because most of the time I work by myself and then I hire outside contractors for bigger projects. But companies, people have lost their livelihoods. Their businesses will not return, will not recover. They're over. They're done. They're gone. That didn't have to happen. And you can blame socialism. I mean, obviously, to a point, you can blame communism because it started in China. China lied. And that was the original snowball that started the avalanche. And, hey, cleverly done, China. Nice psychological, tactical use of an information war campaign. Because that's what this was. That's what this is and is ongoing. The new article from Breitbart, which shows us, which is talking about 90% of coronavirus hospitalized patients have underlying conditions. That means that only about a little less than 10,000 people have actually died of just straight up coronavirus. Right, and don't let me oversell this. Now, it's quite probable that there were many people who had existing comorbidities like diabetes, obesity, etc., who would have lived, decades more even, but who would have had years and years and years left to live, and the complication from coronavirus was the straw that broke the camel's back and put them out. I'm not downplaying that. I'm not. But for the actual deaths from just coronavirus to be less than 10,000, This is a dramatically less dangerous virus than they originally reported. And like one of the things I said I wanted to get clear on that is not detailed here is whether or not influenza deaths with comorbidities are counted toward the seasonal flu death rate. And I suspect they are. And I'll even go so far as to say that that's not unreasonable. But let's be clear about what the comorbidities in the COVID cases include. Some of these are anecdotal, but there are several dozen articles about similar cases. There are articles out there about cases of people dying in car accidents and being listed as COVID-related deaths. People dying in motorcycle accidents. There have been reports of suicides. Homeboy just straight shot himself in the face, listed as COVID cases with comorbidities. Why do you think that's happening? Who is to blame for that? I'll give you a hint. He's running for office. That's right. Joe Biden. It's not Joe Biden personally. It's the Democrats. It's leftism. It's socialism. Because in this country we have, and this is before Obamacare. Obamacare just made the problem worse. But in this country we have a vast welfare state and a vast safety net, part of which is Medicaid. Long before any of this became a problem, a big part of what led the numbers to rise to begin with in the cost of healthcare, it works a lot like the rapidly rising cost of college education in this country. It's subsidized. It's heavily subsidized. And it's so heavily subsidized that the actual costs have been hidden away from the consumer. Okay, when you've got a daddy that'll just pay for what you buy, you don't go pick the jalopy off the car lot. You go pick the car you want, and you don't ask how much it costs because nobody expects you to know. So you don't make an informed buying decision based on that cost. Right? Same thing with college and healthcare. So let's focus on healthcare. You don't know what your healthcare costs. Most people, even most responsible people, don't really know what their healthcare costs because they've got a health insurance policy. They know what their deductible is, and they know that whatever they do after the deductible is covered. It never occurs to them that everything they did before the deductible could have been done for less than the deductible if they had shopped around to private practitioners. Now, in fairness to those people who would have been more responsible had the health insurance not obscured their decision-making faculties, in fairness to those people, those private doctors, those private practitioners who can and will treat you as a customer and you come in and pay a reasonable wage for a service to be rendered, are few and far between now. And in particular with something like the COVID situation, the hospitals are reimbursed by Medicaid, and they're reimbursed higher for certain conditions, like, for example, COVID. This is an article from the beginning of August. Hospitals have incentive to inflate COVID deaths, CDC chief admits. That's right. The CDC chief admits. So that's a reasonable authority to claim and appeal to. And here's what he lays out. I think you're correct in that we've seen this in other disease processes too. Really, in the HIV epidemic, somebody may have a heart attack, but also have HIV. The hospital would prefer the classification for HIV because there's a greater reimbursement. The CARES Act, $2 trillion emergency relief package, increases per patient Medicaid reimbursements to hospitals by 20% for patients listed with a principal or secondary diagnosis of COVID-19. So if you were listed with COVID-19, they got an extra something like $3,700. And it was more than double that if you died on a ventilator. Which is especially terrifying because we know now that the ventilator cases had the most conservative, the most charitable estimates I've seen on that were almost 20%. Survival rate. Not fatality rate. Not 20% of the people that went on a ventilator died. No, 80%. And that's the most conservative estimate. The estimate that seems to have the most consensus is somewhere a little closer to 11%. Which means that nearly 90% of people who went on a ventilator for COVID died. So I ask you, in a world where the medical community is in bed with insurance agencies and is in bed with the government, which is infected with far left propagandized ideology, which includes the religious adherence to this bizarre concept that the human population needs to be reduced for the sake of the planet. Doctors were being paid, hospitals were being paid extra to make their doctors over-report numbers, and they got a bonus if they could get somebody to die on a ventilator, and then the vast majority of people who were put on ventilators died. But if you can spend millions and millions of dollars on pretending that Donald Trump peed on a hooker for 4 years, y'all need to kick some shit in gear and go conduct a serious investigation here. Because yes, I am alleging that there is a high probability that many ventilator cases were outright murder for profit. That's what these numbers suggest. Now, how would this have gone if we were truly a capitalist society? If we had a true capitalist economy? Well, here's the rules on socialism. If you want less of something, you tax it. You know, like property and commodities and income and wealth. If you want more of something, you know, kind of like when you extend the unemployment benefits to plus $600 a week for the period of a pandemic, and then you tell everybody that you can't get sick by protesting. Oh, wait. An act of the Democrats who support the violence in the streets and currently control the purse strings are paying Americans to not be at work an extra $600 a week. So if you want more of something, you subsidize it. Like poverty, abortion, riots, If you want less of something like cigarettes, right? And hey, that's fair. People shouldn't smoke. It's bad for you. I'm not going to quit anytime soon, but it's bad for you. But you want less of something, you tax it. Like, for example, maybe we should have a tax on teen pregnancy instead of a subsidy. Oh, teen pregnancy is a problem. Then stop paying for it. Stop purchasing it. If you don't want it, don't buy it. If you didn't want it, you wouldn't be buying it. That is the key takeaway from every Democrat policy ever suggested. If you didn't want it, you wouldn't be buying it. That's why they wanted the individual mandate on health insurance. Health insurance is a basic insurance generally is a reasonable thing. That's a group of people saying, hey, we all have risk. Let's come together and we will all sacrifice a little now so that in the future, some of us don't have to suffer unexpected losses, right? It's group risk mitigation. You take the risk and you spread it out across several people, right? 10 people could get together and put together $500 a piece and stick it in a pot, right? Now you've got $5,000 sitting in a pot somewhere. And then something, the transmission goes out on one of their cars. So they go and they fix the transmission out of that pot, right? And then the pot's depleted by however much it costs to fix the transmission. And you maybe replenish it over time, or maybe you don't. Maybe you just use it until it's exhausted. The point is, all 10 of those people were at risk of something generally occurring, and they went in together to create a risk mitigation blanket. If suddenly one of us has $1,000 expense that arises, instead of having to just come up with $1,000 right then and there, then boom, we got you. You're covered. It's good to go. Okay, and then you expand that over more and more people. The more people you get in the same insurance pool, in the same company, the more broadly that risk is mitigated. It's actually the exact same principle that's used to make bulletproof armor work. Right? When you get shot, a bullet hits you, and it hits in one spot and it goes through. The way bulletproof armor works is using a mesh or ceramic or something, a spider web pattern of concussive force expands across the breadth of the plate, which mitigates the individual impact. It still hurts. It's still like getting hit by a damn truck, but you're not pierced. And I'd rather be punched than stabbed any day of the week. Insurance works like bulletproof armor, right? Medicaid does not, because it's non-voluntary. Now, that's a big damn difference. That's a huge damn difference. So, if we were in a pure capitalist society without the involuntary pseudo-risk mitigation, and the reason that involuntary risk mitigation is not legitimate risk mitigation is because when you do it that way, now you're obscuring the buying decisions from the mitigated risk assets, right? The individuals who would otherwise be having their risk mitigated don't have any way to understand. They're literally being actively refused the information to understand. Go try to find out how much it costs to actually have an MRI. Good luck. And so they can't make informed decisions because they're literally having the information explicitly repealed from them. Right? So, in that pure capitalist society, you would have You'd go, you'd pay a doctor for services, and it would be a reasonable price because he would have to compete with other doctors. They would have to publish their prices because you wouldn't do business with them if they didn't. And then you would make your buying decision on the reputation of the doctor and the price of the doctor. And you're not always going to go for the cheapest doc, right? Right? I mean, Papa John's Pizza goes out of their way to make the point that, like, you won't see Papa John's advertise their prices as a particular advantage over someone else. They'll advertise that they're doing a special. They'll advertise that they're doing a discount for a celebratory reason, something like that. But unlike Little Caesars and others, Papa John's goes out of their way. Better ingredients, better pizza. That's their line, right? And when I worked at Papa John's for a few years when I was a kid, and when I was first working there, you know, especially when I got into the management program, they harped on the sales point all the time. Look, our pizza is more expensive because it's better pizza. The customers we want are customers who want to pay more money for better quality. And so that would be part of the medical community too. There would be doctors who had flipping boutique doctors' offices where it's like you're going shopping for a diamond in Buckhead, Georgia, and before the salesman says anything to you about diamonds, he offers you a champagne and a cookie. Which is a thing I didn't know about until very recently. And no, that's not because I went and bought a diamond. About a year ago, anyway, that's a whole other thing. It actually had to do with a flooring store that wanted to be a Buckhead-style boutique. But anyway, you'd be looking at people making buying decisions, and they'd be making straight buying decisions. There would not then exist a government subsidy to incentivize hospitals to falsify death statistics and to, it looks like, commit murder for profit. That incentive would not exist. An incentive like that, just like a monopoly cannot exist without the force of government. It cannot. I'll caveat that. It's almost impossible for a monopoly to exist without the force of government. If the conditions were such that there was a single producer of a product whose quality could not be overcome and whose price could not be undercut by a competitor, then it is possible that that person could maintain a monopoly. But that's also assuming that you're talking about a product of such a high value that the demand was sufficiently low to prevent at least additional subsidiary distributorships. There's a lot of if coming off of that question. So yes, you could have one guy that was the only guy who knew how to make the magic widget and wouldn't tell anybody else and charge an outrageous price for it, and nobody could pop up and compete with that. But you know, like Steve says in the chat here, that would be a beneficial monopoly. And it is in fact possible for there to be a beneficial monopoly. But the conditions are almost unmeetable. I could do a whole show some other later on Monopoly. I'm running a list. I got a shitload of stuff that we got to talk about. But hey, I'm gonna be here for a while. Okay. So the big takeaway here is that our economy and the livelihoods of many of our small business owners in America were intentionally sabotaged. And yes, it is not just the case that the panic porn and the pandemic panic are a result of incentivized fraud where the government paid hospitals to defraud the people. And there should be an investigation here where we don't mince words and go mealy-mouthed with the bullshit. What was collusion? No, allege the actual crime: conspiracy to defraud the American people. That is the crime that's been committed. The crime that has resulted in murder for profit by ventilator, with the ventilator as the murder weapon, has been one of a conspiracy to defraud. This is not an opinion or a supposition. This is not a wild theory that I'm throwing out there. This is a conclusion based on a legitimate analysis of the evidence at hand. I've shown you the evidence. It's not hard. You've been lied to. You've been murdered. You've been robbed. So, the next time you hear one of these lefty nutbags go on about how Donald Trump mishandled the virus, ask them how. How did he, what did he do wrong? Right? Now, some of the propaganda outlets have some answers to that question. They're fabrications, they're outright lies, and they're easily debunked with legitimate facts. Because they'll make the claim, well, he didn't take it seriously enough soon enough. The shutdown was at the end of February. Right, the travel embargo was at the end of February. Could he have done that back in November when I first started talking about this virus? Maybe. Cameron and I were talking about this as early as last November. Not just us. I mean, we're brilliant. Well, I am. And before you say it, yes, it would be unreasonable to take a jab at Cameron like that while he's not on the air with me, except that I know damn well he's going to listen to this show while he's at work, while he's driving to work today. And then I'll hear about it later. Yeah. So anyway, they lied. They murdered you. They robbed you. And if they think that they can blame the president for this, the president didn't send the old people back to the hotels, or back to the retirement homes. The president didn't shut down the economy. In fact, the president did exactly what he was supposed to do. He took actions in the national interest where he could, travel embargo, and then, in compliance with the restrictions of the 10th Amendment, which restrains the federal government to those powers explicitly enumerated within the document, and retains those powers to the states and the people, he left the handling, state by state, of the virus to the governors, as he should. And the governors, to a degree, left that to the mayors where they could. The governors who are not currently and actively supporting the BLM terror movement left the decisions to their mayors where they could. And by and large, that has gone well across the country. Now, unfortunately, here in Georgia, we're having a little bit of trouble with our. We've got. Georgia goes red for the general and has for a long time and almost certainly will this year. Georgia goes red pretty consistently for the governor because the majority of Georgia is good, hardworking, red country. But anytime you get near a population center, Democrats, parasites, climb up, and they are a cancer. Socialism is a cancer. And I don't know how we're going to cut it out. But I know I can start for just not voting for Kamala Harris for president. So, I think I'm going to leave it there. Good show this morning. Nice active chat. I was a little in my own head on this topic, so I wasn't paying real close attention to the chat. I will go through and read them and make some responses, I suppose. But I do want to respond to Lindsay here. She says, Big Pharma is the second most profitable business in the world behind gas, oil. You didn't stay rich by keeping people healthy. I'm gonna have to check you on those numbers. The slave trade is up there, and I think it eclipses both of them. And I think the drug trade does as well. And the cartel drug trade distinctly from Big Pharma, although the lines are blurry. But yeah, I will see you guys tomorrow. Y'all be safe out there and have a great day. I lost my in card button. There it is.